The AI race is over and Google won, and it's probably one of the greatest comebacks in history. But what did they discover that caused them to make this wild change in a matter of only 2 years? You see, in 2023, everyone thought that Google was dead because when ChatGPT was first released, it basically was a supercharged Google. On top of that, Google was so slow to get to the market in response, and when they did with Google Bard, it became the laughingstock of the internet. It struggled with basic prompts and its launch day was incredibly underwhelming. For years, Google cornered the search engine market, but when ChatGPT was released, it finally had competition. Because instead of sifting through paid ads in SEO optimized article, I can now just get the answer that I'm looking for and a companion that would say it nicely. And suddenly ChatGPT was the king of the internet. But all of that is changing. Gemini is suddenly eating ChatGPT's lunch. SimilarWeb reported that over the past 12 months, Gemini has more than tripled its generative AI web traffic from 5.4% to 18.2%, causing OpenAI's market share to drop down to 68% from 80%. This caused OpenAI and ChatGPT to issue a code red, and that resulted in us basically getting a rushed version of ChatGPT 5.2. So what is really going on? Let's take a look at some of the small but impactful factors. OpenAI lost $13.5 billion in the first half of 2025. The company is literally bleeding cash and it's constantly having to ask for more money. One of the biggest problems here is for a brief time period, OpenAI could just focus on scaling, adding more compute power. But now the scale is massive and it's unlikely that adding 100 times more scale is going to transform anything. And honestly, if anyone thinks that just scaling up large language models is going to get us to human level AI, they're completely wrong. And Google knows that, so instead of trying to scale more, they just focus on making a better product while continuing to do what they already do best. You see, this is where the real separation happens because Google actually has money to blow. They have a market cap of $3.7 trillion and they're actually profitable. So they don't have to rely on selling people a fantasy to rake in more money like OpenAI and ChatGPT. They can afford to have things not work and restart again. This is basically what we saw with the whole Bard situation. So they went back to the lab and worked on the core technology instead of optimizing for the experiences first, like most AI companies are doing. And then they figured out how to funnel it out to its other products like Search, Cloud, and Gmail. I love this quote from one article that says, they went back to the technology stack to focus on making that world-class above all else, and then worry about the experience that's going to enable it secondary. Not the other way around, not trying to build some ridiculous experience and get the technology to map. And this just works because in the grand scheme of things, Google has built up an incredible talent pool over the course of its 2+ decades of dominance. Google Brain and DeepMind divisions have been working on long-term AI research for decades, even before the AI revolution. But once these two divisions merged in 2023, they focused on transforming Bard into Gemini. But this is where things get interesting. This is what most people are not paying attention to, because while everyone else was making the best chatbot, Google was building something else. They decided to play a different game. They weren't playing for a better chatbot. They were playing for the entire infrastructure of human intelligence. And it starts with the ecosystem. Google has pretty much dominated everything from email to search to entertainment, not to mention the fact that Android is used by billions of people every day, and it's a dominant force in the mobile phone market. This is massive because it allows Google to seamlessly integrate Gemini in their already existing products. So instead of just relying on a standalone chatbot to do all the heavy lifting, their current ecosystem allows Gemini's footprint to be everywhere. Apple had this chance, but for whatever reason, they just can't get AI right. As a matter of fact, they can't even get Siri right after all of these years. Okay, so let's look at the search part of the ecosystem. Most people would think that the search portion of their business will be dead, but it's actually growing fast. In fact, according to this article I found, search revenue jumped 15% in the third quarter of 2025 and reached a whopping $56 billion in revenue. And that helped Google reach its first $100 billion quarter. You see, it would seem counterintuitive that most people would still want to search, but Google says people like it because of its generative AI responses. And it's not just the search alone that's bringing in the revenue. It's the fact that Google has had decades of a head start of selling ads. And this is an area that OpenAI just can't compete because, well, they don't sell ads. And maybe most consumers would see that as a good thing, but for OpenAI, it's just one less revenue stream that would make them profitable. And then we have to look at the cloud portion. Their cloud division turned in $15 billion in revenue in the third quarter of 2025. But get this, both Anthropic and OpenAI have signed deals to run on Google's cloud infrastructure. Not only that, but Google also owns a big stake in Anthropic through an investment. That's mind-blowing. But one of their best kept secrets so far is Waymo, in which Google's parent company Alphabet owns. They reportedly are looking to roll out an AI companion inside of these Waymo vehicles. All right, so that's the ecosystem. But something else that we have to look at is the infrastructure. You see, everyone is clamoring over NVIDIA, and they're really good at what they do, don't get me wrong. But while every other AI company is fighting to get their hands on an NVIDIA chip, paying a massive GPU tax, Google has quietly been building their own silicon for over a decade, and they call it the Ironwood TPU. Unlike its competitors, Gemini is being trained and run on Google's own chip rather than NVIDIA's. What this means is that NVIDIA is going to be facing competition from Google. Now, at the start, Gemini faced a ton of failures, generating historically inaccurate images or being too politically correct. This made Google eventually suspend Gemini's ability to generate images of people. But since then, users are reporting that Gemini is more accurate and coherent than OpenAI's ChatGPT and does better with complex tasks. You see, this isn't just a chip, it's Google's cheat code, because now that Google owns the hardware, the software, and the data centers, they can run models like Gemini 3 Flash at a fraction of the cost of GPT-5 or Claude 4. And this also puts NVIDIA in an interesting position, because now they either have to lower the cost of their chips, or most people are going to turn towards Google for their solution. And this is what's called vertical integration. You see, when OpenAI wants to scale, they pay Microsoft, who then pays NVIDIA. When Google wants to scale, they pay themselves. It's just one big circle. This allows Google to do what most can't: offer massive 1 million plus token context windows for pennies. Now, we have to talk about one of Google's greatest advantages, and this is probably one of the most underrated of them all: data. Because OpenAI and Anthropic are running out of high quality internet text to source their data. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel, dealing with lawsuits and trying to license news archives. Google just doesn't have that problem. Why? Because Google is the internet. Think about it. Google has millions of pages, links, text, personal data right in their own database to source from. YouTube, the world's largest library of video and audio for multimodal training. Google Maps, real-world spatial data that no one else possesses. Android, billions of edge devices providing real-time feedback. When Google trained Gemini 3, they didn't just scrape web pages. They used real human data that they already have. Actual human intent. This is why Gemini's video reasoning is currently untouchable. It's not just seeing pixels. It's understanding the physics of the world based on 2 decades of YouTube data. OpenAI is trying to build a workspace inside a chat box, but Google already owns the workspace. 2 billion people already live in Gmail, Docs, and Sheets. Google didn't have to convince you to download a new app. They just hit a switch and turned your email into an autonomous assistant. Everyone thought Google had finally reached its end, but while everyone was chattering and making bold claims, Google went and did what it does best: closed its mouth and got to work. It's a strategy that has worked for them and kept them on top. They don't just talk about what they're doing, they do it and execute well. Think about it. There was a time when Yahoo and Bing had a chance to compete with them in the search market. During that time, they weren't focused on making bold claims to separate themselves. Instead, they were doing the opposite. Even though the signs were clear that they were becoming a monopoly, they always made claims that they were far from that. Or look at YouTube. Name another platform that can compete with YouTube. It's currently eating Hollywood for dinner, with YouTube being the most watched streaming platform on television. And even still, it never touts itself as a Hollywood killer. They just quietly work in the background and accomplish their goals. I believe that Google is a 100-year company. And if it continues on the trajectory it's on now, it will be the greatest tech company of all time. If you actually like Google, hit that subscribe button. If you don't, hit that like button. And remember, Jesus loves you, and so do I. Peace.